Body count is a convenient byproduct of progress in becoming a better fighter. It is an indicator, but it's not the ultimate measurement, right? Body count is one of those things that just kind of gets collected along the way as you become a better fighter. But if you're doing pickups with somebody and you say, well, I went 6 out of 10 fights with that Duke over there, well, that doesn't really tell you anything. And if you are focused on the number of wins and losses you had in a given set with a given fighter, you're doing it wrong. Your focus is completely off, right? Because you are more concerned about counting victories than you are with executing your best fight, right? Because just knowing how many fights you had, let alone what your win percentage is, tells me that you're not concentrating on eliminating your deficiencies. Does that make sense? So same kind of thing with tournament, right? You go to a tournament and you say, well, I must be doing pretty good because I went 5 rounds. I went 5 rounds in this tournament, right? It's like, okay, so at what point in that tournament did you start facing members of the chivalry, right? At what point in that tournament did you start facing a Duke? As you go into Crown Tourney, your first 2 rounds are Bela and Jax. Well, sometimes you go 2 and out. Sometimes your finals come early. And that is not necessarily an accurate reflection of your fight. And it's not an accurate reflection of your progress in that fight. Does that make sense? So we cannot base progress strictly on victory condition or on body count alone. And so we have to redefine victory conditions, and we have to take a different assessment of what it means to be successful. And to me, that success is simply progress. And progress cannot be measured strictly by wins and losses, because that's not it just doesn't reflect, it doesn't accurately reflect progress. One of the ways that this manifests itself in particular is when you have a Baronnet like my group at home, which has a lot of our talent from our kingdom. So a lot of our unbelted fighters, they come to practice, and their victory percentage, their kill count, doesn't really increase all that much, because when they come to fight us, we're still beating them as much as we usually do. But what they can't see is that because they are making progress as a fighter, because they are better, it takes me more effort to maintain a certain kill percentage, right? And they can't see that because the only way they have to measure success is by count. And then they go to random shire in the middle of nowhere, and they're just cleaning house. They're like, I don't win like this at home. You're right, you don't. And that's a big part of why you can't see progress, and sometimes it does get, it can get demoralizing, when you feel like the only measure you have is body count and you're not getting any more body count, so I must not be getting better, right? So redefine your victory conditions. Redefine what it means to have success. Because sometimes, if you throw a valid mechanic at a valid target and your opponent blocks the shot that you're throwing, that does not diminish the fact that you threw a good mechanic at a valid target. And you have to consider that as a success, even if that did not end up in a kill. Does that make sense? And I know it may seem kind of counterintuitive, but that's one of the things that we really have to look at to change how we are measuring what success is. Okay? And this is something I harp on a lot, because this is a concept that is lost on many people. Because again, it's not as tangible as being able to go out there and say, I won 8 fights, right? And so when you go to practice, you have to approach practice with that mindset. You are there to become a better fighter, and whatever kills you get on the day, that's just gravy. Even if you don't get any, and you still become a better fighter at the end of the day, that is the victory. Okay? So, in any learning endeavor, in anything that we're going to learn, there are basically 3 phases of learning something. Okay? There's training, there's practice, and there's an evaluation. If you think about it as a college math course, right? You go to class, and your instructor gets up on the board and he demonstrates to you the mechanic of how to solve a problem, right? That is training. That is where you are being taught how to do the thing, okay? And then you'll have your homework, where you may or may not have access to the answers, so that you can verify whether or not you did the mechanic correctly. And you can, but you go home and you execute X number of problems, and with the mechanic that you have been taught, right? That's practice. That's where you are trying to get better at the thing, without having your instructor walking you through every single step of it, because they already did that in training. Okay? And then at some point you have a quiz or midterms, right? So say you have a midterm math test. When you go to that midterm math test, that is your evaluation. That is where you find out how well you have studied the information that is in hand. Right? And then you go back to training, right? So in this model, if you have that midterm quiz, presumably you don't get all the problems right? So one of the things about the way people learn things, we learn more from our failures than we do our successes. Success we take as the natural order of things. We assume that we're supposed to do it right. And just because you got the correct answer doesn't mean you understand the material. You could have had just a good guess and ended up with the right answer, or you could have done the formula incorrectly and still somehow ended up with the right answer. That's not true mastery. That's not an understanding of what that is. So we learn more from our failures than we do our successes. So when you look at your evaluation, when you look at that midterm quiz that you have, you guys all know this. When you look at that, you don't look at the questions that you got right. We always go to the ones that we got wrong, right? That's the immediate focus. Is we go to the ones that we got wrong, and we have to evaluate that and find out where the deficiency is. Okay, and this kind of comes to my overall training methodology. So as opposed to the smash and bash training methodology, where we're just going to set you free and you magically learn it, right? The method that I use is something I refer to as isolating and eliminating. Okay, we are going to isolate your deficiencies, and then we are going to work through the process to eliminate those deficiencies. Okay, isolating your deficiencies means that I am going to focus on the things that you have done wrong for precisely that reason, because we learn more from our failures. So the stuff you're doing right, that's cute and all, but the stuff that you did wrong, we have specific methods that we can use to fix those things that are wrong. And as you eliminate those deficiencies, the next greatest deficiency is going to be revealed. And it's not that that wasn't a problem to begin with, but the first deficiency that you worked on was a bigger problem, right? So if you're having a problem with stick mechanics and shield discipline and footwork, we're going to isolate to one of those things that is the biggest of those problems. Okay? So say we work on stick mechanics, right? So you get better at your stick mechanics, and all of a sudden your footwork is the next biggest problem because you've made improvement on your stick mechanics. So now we work on your footwork, and as that gets better, then we work on shield discipline. Shield discipline has always been a problem. It's just not as big a problem as the other two before that. And then what ends up happening is you get better at your shield discipline, and all of a sudden your stick mechanics are the next problem. So we go back to the thing that was the problem. These things are it's a constant evolution. It is a constant cycle of training, practice, evaluation, isolating and eliminating deficiencies. And so that means when I do an evaluation, when you ask me to look at your fight, I'm not going to tell you what an awesome fighter you are. I'm going to go immediately to tell you what is wrong with your fight. Because those are the things that need to be fixed, and those are the things that are going to make you a better fighter. There are definitely things you can learn from your successes, and we can point out some of the things you're doing well. As far as progressing your fight, we're going to look at the things that are wrong, and we're going to move on with that. Okay? Failure in our sport, as with many other things, failure is not a lot of people want to look at, when you fail to win a tournament, there's this internal pressure that you create for yourself where, like, it's a character judgment. I didn't win the tournament, so I'm an awful person. It's like, no, you're just not as good a fighter as other people, right? You hear me talking a lot about focusing on the failures, and it's not that I'm not trying to teach a losing mentality. I'm not telling you that it's okay to fail, right? Winning is always better than losing. There's no two ways about that, right? But failure is a fact, and it is going to happen, and it's going to happen far more than success does. And so we need to, it's what you do with that failure that is going to make a difference in your fighting. You can have that failure and let that pile on and feel sorry for yourself, or you can find out, what is about that is a deficiency, and you can work to correct it. So I'm always going to be focusing on the things that are wrong with your fight. So like I said, when you ask me to do an evaluation, video, or whatever, I'm going to go immediately, this is what is wrong. And I'm not doing that to badger you, to tell you that you're an awful fighter. I'm doing that because I don't have time. I don't have time to tell you how glorious you are and how great that one flat snap was that you did. Let's fix this thing and get you progress. Let's get you moving on in the cycle. And as that cycle happens, again, it is a continuous life cycle sort of thing. Training, practice, and evaluation. You keep coming back to the deficiencies that are improved, but now they are the next greatest deficiency. And there are a number of things. I talked about like stick mechanics, footwork, and shield discipline because those are easy examples. But there's just infinite numbers of the parts of the fight that we can actually pinpoint, identify, and say this is what your problem is. Give you a mechanic to fix that deficiency. Okay. And you're going to keep coming back to something that you have made improvement on, and now you need to refine that and make more improvement on those things. Because it's like, I guess it was Michelangelo that said, I don't really make statues. I just take a block of marble and I just chip away the parts that aren't David, right? And that's what we're doing. We're cutting away at the parts that are deficient. We're just chipping away at those things. And when you can focus on fixing the one thing, when you go to practice and you can say, this is the one thing that I'm working on, your victory condition then becomes, if stick mechanics is the one greatest deficiency you have, your success is becoming better at that mechanic that you practice. Take all the wins and losses and just throw them out the window, because that doesn't matter. It's not nearly as important as you making progress on this one thing. And that training process usually takes about, in the beginning it takes about 3 months. Right? 3 months is my standard measure for how long it is going to take you to recognize improvement in a given thing. Okay? I will be able to recognize progress in your efforts long before that. But when you're trying new stick mechanics, the first month is going to be a total train wreck, and it's just going to feel just awful. And then the second month is going to feel not quite as awful, but you're still not going to feel ownership of that technique. And by 3 months in, that is the point at which you yourself will feel some sort of ownership in whatever the new technique is. And eventually, as you begin to understand training methodology and you understand this process, that timeline kind of gets shortened and you can fix things faster. But if I'm going to tell you to fix something, I'm going to expect you to spend 3 months doing just that one thing and focusing on just that one thing. Again, go to practice, forget about wins and losses. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant, and it is counterproductive to learning the thing. Because if you go and you're trying to work on stick mechanics and you get frustrated and you're just going back to doing the same old shit that you were doing before, you're gonna get some more kills and you're gonna be a worse fighter because of it. Does it make sense? Any questions so far? So back to the example of the math quiz, right? So you get the math quiz. This is where we isolate deficiencies. You look at the problems that you got wrong, and then you go back to your instructor and say, this is, you taught me this, I don't understand this, I need you to teach me again. And you do training again. He demonstrates again how to do that mechanic. And then you go home and you do more homework on that. And after that homework, you come to the finals, and you find out, you get another evaluation, and ideally, you have then made progress in that particular part that was deficient, and you do better on the test at the end. Does it make sense? That's what our process is, okay? And you have to understand that training is a process. There's all kinds of speculation about fighting style, fighting weapon systems, right? Fighting style and various weapon systems is a very personal, very subjective sort of measure, okay? There is no one perfect fighting style. I do not believe in the one true way. A lot of the stuff that I teach works well for a lot of people, but I am not the end-all be-all of the trainers that we have out there. There is a limit to which you can learn from one individual, and you have to experience as much as you can with as many different instructors as you can to be able to find them. The more you are experienced to the differences in our sport, and that means different weapon systems, that means different training systems, that means different fighters, the more you are exposed to the differences, the more you begin to understand the commonalities. The best fighters in our sport are basically all doing the same basic common style, but they do it with their own style. Okay, so style is very subjective. I'm not here for you to learn my style, okay? Because the style, again, it's very personal. Okay? What I'm here to do is change your training methodology, change the process by which you learn our sport. Because while style is subjective, the training process that I teach is absolutely proven. I have a large body of evidence to suggest that this training methodology and an approach to learning our sport is successful. I don't care what you're learning, I don't care who you're learning it from, but if you follow this training process, you are going to learn our sport. Does it make sense? Well, again, that's one of the things that I'm trying to change as I lecture, is I'm trying to change the way we learn rather than what we're learning. Make sense? So, training, practice, evaluation, with the idea of isolating and eliminating deficiencies. Okay? So, training for us is any number of things where you are given instruction. This is going to be walkthroughs, this is going to be drills, this can be this is pell work, footwork drills, honestly watching YouTube videos of somebody else doing stuff, analyzing what they're doing, trying to, anything that you can do to remain engaged in the training process and understanding how a thing is done. Training is being taught how to do a thing. This is where I teach a class on pell work, and I teach a drill on footwork, and I teach a drill on recovery, and all these other things. I'm walking through this drill to show you how these things are done. Okay? Do you have a question? Okay. So that's training. That's where you are taught how to do the thing. Then we have practice. Okay? So at practice, practice for us is, for the most part, we're going to consider them to be fully armored practice with variations of full speed, full contact, and half speed, and whatnot. But one of the really, really super critical things to understand about practice, armored practice, is there are two types of practice. There is deficiency training, and then there is sparring. Okay? Deficiency training is where you are trying to get better at the thing that you suck at. We've isolated your deficiency, and we're doing training specifically for you to exercise a technique that is going to get you better at your deficiency. Yes?
Should the two different types be communicated across the field to each other?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is a must. Because if you are doing deficiency training and I'm doing sparring, it's going to end bad for you. Anytime you make changes to your fight, you are going to lose. You are doing things that you are not good at. That's why they are deficiency. And And so you're executing techniques that are new to you, that are foreign to you, that you are not good at. When you are doing a part of your fight that you're not good at, and I'm doing a part of my fight that I'm very good at, it is going to end badly for the student. Okay? So yes, absolutely this must be communicated at practice in every fight that you have. Okay? So when you're doing that deficiency training, you need to communicate to your opponent and say, this is what I am working on. Okay? Because when we're doing deficiency training, we're not concerned about wins and losses, we're not concerned about the better fighter, we're concerned about helping our friend and our opponent get better as a fighter. And so when that person, we need to, not make a secret of what you are working on. Okay? So you need to say, I'm working on footwork. And so your opponent can take that time to help you work on footwork and provide you opportunities for you to exercise that part of your fight. Okay? One of the critical factors about doing that too is because of the vulnerability that you create when you're doing deficiency training, right? You have made yourself vulnerable, okay? And there are some very legitimate dangers in you doing something you're not good at when you're, like, the difference between deficiency training and sparring, okay? So part of that communication is we have to, at practice, we have to create an environment where it is safe for you to fail. So when you're doing things that you're not good at, you are going to fail. That's a fact. We need to make sure that in the course of that failure, you are not going to get injured. Does that make sense? So we all have an obligation to each other to make sure that when we are creating, that we have to artificially create that environment, and we do that by articulating very clearly and communicating with your opponent. Anytime you get to practice, you look at your opponent and say, is there something you want to work on? Are you working on something? Yes, I want to work on footwork, or I want to work on stick mechanics. Okay, let me provide for you an environment where it is safe for you to do this thing that you're not good at. Okay? This is an absolutely critical function of how we train and what we use fighter practice for. And this is the one function that most of our sport absolutely fails to do. Because you just get out there and fight and hope it's going to go well, right? And again, it's just a horribly inefficient means of teaching somebody how to fight. Does that make sense? That's an excellent question. You totally nailed it. So create an environment where it is safe for you to fail so that you can do that deficiency training, so you can exercise, because you have to, at some point, you can do the drills and you can do pellet work and footwork and all this other stuff, but at some point you actually have to put on the armor, swing the stick, and make the thing work, right? And as we do drills and as we do the deficiency training, the object here is to try to execute the mechanic in a way that is increasingly more and more resembles live combat. Okay, the Navy SEALs have a saying: the more we sweat in training, the less we bleed in combat. Same kind of thing. Let us create an environment where we can do the work in a practice setting, so that we can make practice more and more like live combat. So that when we get to live combat and we get to tournament combat, we have, because all of what you're doing in that kind of training is you're doing what I refer to as programming the onboard computer. Okay, best fighters in our sport, we do things that are absolutely automatic. I was talking to John yesterday about triggered responses. Okay, there are a lot of things that I do where who's I talking to? Oleg? Yeah. I blasted Oleg in the arm a couple years ago in Australia. That was a triggered response. His hand went out. My brain gets a sight picture of this happening, and I throw a shot right into the shoulder socket, which ended up hitting him in the bicep. So I guess my targeting's a little off. That's usually right there in the knee, but it's okay. But that's a triggered response, right? And that is because I have, throughout the years, programmed my onboard computer to recognize when that hand goes out here, that sets a flag in my programming, and that executes a certain mechanic. Okay? So much so that when I get that sight picture, my hand can't do anything else. When I get that, it is so automatically ingrained in what I'm in. And training and drills and practice is where you program those responses. So if you're just going out and just flailing and throwing stuff out there, and you're throwing all these shots out here because that is what has always worked for you, it's going to work to a certain extent. And then you're going to run into somebody either at your practice or in a tournament where that stuff just doesn't work. And because you haven't bothered programming your onboard computer, you're no better a fighter than you were years ago, right? That's why we have to take this time, and that's part of what we're doing is programming the onboard computer to give us the best possible responses for the situations that we face. Make sense? So, deficiency training, and then we have sparring. Okay. So sparring. The reason that sparring at practice is so critical is because if the only opportunity that you have to execute your fight fully and completely is the tournament environment, if that's the only chance you have to do that, you have to understand that any tournament that you have carries with it certain expectations because it is an evaluation of sorts. A lot of people look at tournament as again a judgment value sort of thing, where if I go 2 and out, I'm a horrible person, right? And we carry an emotional component with us in tournament that impacts our ability to just execute the fight. Okay, and that is a side of competitive fighting that we'll be getting into later. But the best fighters in our sport, the Crown Contender fighters, Crown Tournament is not a physical contest. It is a mental exercise. Okay, and a lot of that is the emotional component that is involved in tournament. So if the only opportunity that you have to execute your fight fully and completely to its fullest extent is in the tournament, you are working against the emotional baggage that you take into tournament. And so you're not able to truly execute your fight because of the concern that comes with that emotional baggage. Does that make sense? So it's one more variable that has to be dealt with separately, okay? So by having sparring at practice, we get to execute our fight fully and completely without the emotional component, without the concern for wins and losses, without the concern for what people are going to think about how good my fighting is or is not. Okay, so that's why sparring is a critical component of practice. And let's face it, it's fun, right? So ideally, when you're at practice, every fight that you have, every partner you have for executing a fight in practice should involve both components. You start with, I'm working on this. What are you working on? Let me help you work on this thing. Get that deficiency practice. And then sparring is kind of the cookie. We did the deficiency stuff when I got better at this thing, and now we get to just fight. Okay? So you can kind of look at it at those two things. But again, yeah, make a clear separation in those two things. And when you get done with deficiency training, it's like, okay, I worked on this, so let us now do sparring. Okay? So practice is two sides of that. Okay? And yes, have to absolutely make a clear distinction between those two. Okay? Evaluation. Okay? Evaluation is where you discover how well you have done the training, how well you have done the practice, and how well you have progressed on the given thing. Okay? The most obvious method of evaluation we have is the tournament. Okay? When we're at practice, we tend to have kind of a do-over mentality where it's okay, you know, it doesn't matter, right? I lost the fight, that's okay, we just do that over again, right? Tournament, you go 2 and out, you don't get to play anymore, right? And there is something about that instance where it does matter, where if you are not successful, you don't get to play anymore, right? Everybody wants to play more, right? So there is, again, this emotional component that we get from tournament. One of the things we get from that is when we have failure in a tournament, that is where we have that striking sense of failure and almost loss, if you will, where in a way you don't get at practice because practice doesn't matter, right? And it is that sensation of failure that is going to help you isolate those deficiencies, because that is the point at which you can identify a thing that went wrong that caused you to lose, that caused you to not play anymore. Back in Artemisia, our crown tourneys typically are running a pooled list. So if we have 30 fighters or 32 fighters in a list, we'll take 8 in 4 different pools. You do a round robin in those pools. You take the top 2 fighters out of each pool, and that's your quarterfinals. Okay? It's pretty standard. We do that a lot. We do it for each champion lists as well. One of the convenient byproducts of that is, from a training perspective, if you get in a pool with 8 fighters, you have 7 fights you have to go through. Okay? If you go 0-7, you lose 7 fights in your pool. That is 7 opportunities that you have for somebody to isolate a deficiency for you. And if you have 7 people tell you that you have the same problem, that seems like that's going to be a good place for you to start. But even in a list where you have double elimination, you go 2 and out, when you lose those 2 fights, you absolutely need to be talking to the people that put you out, because they did something, they capitalized on something that is a deficiency. You need to talk to them and find out what their observation was. Now true, some people are not going to be able to, some people don't know how they beat you. That happens. You need to ask that question. Okay? You need to go to each of those opponents and say, what did you see? And again, if you have 2 people tell you that you had exactly the same problem, that's where you start. That is how we isolate deficiencies. That's how we identify what the single greatest failure in that particular exchange was. Does that make sense? So from a training perspective, when we look at tournament, again, there's always, and this is long-standing, this is why people say I don't like fighting tournaments, because I feel like I'm being judged. Again, I can't stress this enough. It feels like character assault. Like you are a bad person because you're not a good fighter. People really take that into a tournament and they let it weigh on them in just really depressing way. So we have to understand the difference between the purpose of a tournament and the value of tournament. Okay? What's the purpose of crown tourney? To establish heirs for the crown. That is the purpose. That is why you were there, is to find out who's going to be next crown. What's the purpose of Baronial Defender tournament? To find out who's going to be your Baronial champion for right? That is the purpose of the tournament. And the purpose of the tournament is wide and varied. Name gone. Evinus, yes. When's the what is it? The Champion of Champions list at Penzing? No World Champions list, right? So it was a list in which we had anybody who was a Baronial champion from throughout the known world, right? So that was the purpose of it, okay? But the tournament format was not necessarily last man standing at the end, right? There were a number of things in there. It was the evaluation of it was a little bit different, so it's not necessarily a reflection of his skill as a fighter, but it's still a different type of evaluation. And so every tournament that is out there has a different purpose, okay? But the value of tournament is consistent throughout. And the value of tournament is isolating deficiencies, and it is understanding what part of your fight you need to work on next. Does that make sense? And once you've isolated your deficiencies, guess what happens? Right back to training. You find out that one thing that was your most critical failure in that list, and you go back to the training, you go to whoever your instructor is, and you go through the mechanics of how to get better at that thing. And you go to practice, and you do your deficiency training, you do your sparring, where ideally you're getting better through sparring at doing these things. And then you go to another tournament later down the road, and ideally you've made improvement in the thing that was the deficiency in the last list you were in. And if all goes well, you then reveal the next greatest deficiency. And the cycle continues. Does it make sense? This is the training process. And it is very much a process, and you can follow it step by step by step. If you are doing training every day, some sort of training, some way to be engaged in our sport, footwork, video review, reading books, there's any number of things that you can do that is not just viable. Doing training every day, if you're doing practice at least once a week, once a week is no less than bare minimum. 2 weeks is better, or twice a week is better. 3 times a week is okay. 4 times a week is way too much because your body doesn't have time to recover. But if you're training every day, doing practice once a week, and you are doing some sort of evaluation on a monthly basis, whether it's a tournament or just get together with somebody that is evaluating you, training every day, practice once a week, tournament once a month. If you are doing those things at that frequency, and you're doing them in earnest, particularly the practice portion of it, and you are properly identifying your victory conditions, if you are doing those things at that frequency, you kind of have to work to screw this up. You are going to improve, you are going to be a better fighter if you are doing those things at that frequency. One of the magic numbers I have for success in our sport is 52, okay? And that is 52 fighting sessions in a 1 year period. It's an average once a week, right? Has anybody here fought 52 times in the last calendar year? Think about it, right? That is bare minimum, okay? It's once a week, you know? Sometimes you get practice, and then, and then you get a tournament on the weekend, and then you skip practice the next week. You're still averaging it out, right? You don't want to fight 52 days in a row and then take the rest of the year off. So if you're doing these things with that frequency, I mean, it's not a spectator sport. You have to actually get out there and be doing it. So if you're wondering why you're not getting better, the frequency of your practices is going to be a big part of that. Right? If you hit 52 times in a 6-month period, you're gonna get better faster. That's just a fact. Any questions at this point?
You have a question?
Yes.
So, in my military training, I was taught the phrase, amateurs practice at success and professionals train for it.
Yeah, another way of putting that is, can you repeat the question?
So, in my military training, I was exposed to the phrase, and amateurs train to success and professionals train to failure.
Another way I've heard that is, amateurs practice until they get it right, and professionals train until they can't get it wrong. It's another way to look at it. We were talking about training for failure. To me, that is embracing failure and understanding that failure is a critical part of this process, right? For isolating deficiencies. Failure is part of that. And something I was talking to John about on the ride here is as you get better as a fighter, it is more and more difficult to have your deficiencies exposed. And it actually takes more work, and you have to fight better caliber fighters who are capable of exposing those deficiencies. Because even for me, as many times as I've been king, I still have deficiencies. I am always working under the impression that there is always something wrong with your fight. Okay? Because if there's nothing wrong with your fight and you are the perfect SCA fighter, you have no need for us anymore, and we have no need for you. because you are complete in every possible way, right? There's always something wrong with your fight. There has to be something wrong with your fight. And as fighters of any level, we have to be open to the possibility that there is a deficiency, even if our deficiencies are few enough and small enough that a vast majority of people cannot capitalize on those deficiencies. I still have to work on the impression that there's got to be something out there. There has to be something that I can be doing better to make myself a better fighter, because that right there is the evolution of our sport, right? I'm sure it stands to reason that our martial art should be better technically in every imaginable way than it was 53 years ago when they had the first tournament in the backyard, to make sense, right? Likewise, our sport should be better now, should be more technically proficient now than it was 30 years ago when I got it. It should be better than it was 10 years ago. And to a lesser degree, it should be better than it was 5 years ago. Part of that is we are teaching our sport better now, so that success in our sport is actually more accessible to a wider range of people. This is a sport, for the most part, is ridiculously forgiving to a non-athletic body type. This is a sport where if you put in the right amount of effort, you can be extremely successful in this sport without being athletically gifted. Does that make sense? If you put in the work, anybody can get this good, right? A lot of people, say, oh, well, if you're going to be king, you have to be Sean good, or you have to be really good. It's like, we weren't born like this, right? If I can get this good, a person can get this good, and that person might as well be you. Why not? Right? And it's the amount of effort. I have a good friend of mine who's been a retired fighter medically retired from fighting for 20 plus years now. He was knighted early 80s, and he had said that with the advancements of fighting and everything, he said if I had to do it now, there's no way that I would have ever gotten knighted. And my response to that has always been that the fighting is better now, but the training methodology is better as well. And if he had put in the same amount of effort that it took him to get knighted in 1980, take the same amount of effort and you apply it with the training methodology that we have now, the way that we're teaching things now, same result. Exactly the same result. Because the training methodology is better and the fighting is better. Right? So the evolution of our sport is trying to constantly make the sport better. And that means, as one of the best fighters in the world, I need to do everything I can to be exposed. Find that guy where I have a bad matchup, or just find that guy who's just flat out better than me. Because that is the sense of failure that we get from the tournament. It is going to make me go home, go back to power, and reevaluate what I'm doing, and try to figure out how that deficiency can be removed, and how I can correct something. Does that kind of address what you're talking about? Good? Any other questions on that? Looks like you still got a question. Does that cover it? Sorry, I had to wax philosophical for a second here. What time we got?
We are at, it was 1100.
So we're going to take a quick break here. That is the training process, and you have to treat it like a process. And if you do, you'll absolutely get better at what we do. So embrace that. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of failure. Embrace failure. Failure is absolutely a critical tool. And again, failure doesn't. It's interesting that I've kind of come to a different understanding of failure. To me, failure is not in and of itself. It's almost meaningless, except that failure, for what we do, applying it to this training process, failure is just data. It's just a fact, right? And it is going to happen. and you take that failure and you apply it to the training process, and that's how the whole process works. Is it starts with failure. It starts with isolating deficiencies because you need to know what's wrong before you can have the roadmap for how to fix it. Does that make sense? So we're going to take a quick break, and the next part that we're going to go into is different parts of the fight. And so we're going to be able to break out the fight, and then for all you technical guys, we're going to do the exploded blueprint version of it, and look at what the fight is so that we can identify the different parts of the fight that you need to work on so that you can apply that to the training, the practice, and the preparation. Does that make sense? So let's take maybe 15.